kind of in quotation, which is really kind of hard to do when you're singing because you can't suddenly go like that. But we'll hope that you get the gist of what we're trying to express, the truth versus this is sometimes the pitfalls that men get into and fall into that spiritual failure that is the topic for today. So please enjoy. It's called Go On Alone. And if you don't remember anything else, please just remember that phrase.
Week 49, what is it to fall spiritually? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. The first passage is from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 25. Jesus tells the parable of the 10 virgins, 5 of them wise and 5 foolish. They await their bridegroom, the Christ consciousness. The wise virgins keep the oil in their lamps, symbolic of their devotion, lit through the night. The foolish virgins place no oil in their lamps. These foolish ones are like the average devotee, going through the motions of outer ritual, but keeping no fire of love burning in the heart. When the bridegroom's coming is announced, the foolish virgins realize their mistake and hasten out to purchase oil. During their absence, the Christ consciousness comes and embraces those who have been awaiting him with devotion. The foolish ones, by their lackluster devotion, are not accepted by him. Watch, therefore, Jesus told his listeners, for you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. In the autobiography of a yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda describes the foolish virgin consciousness he encountered in the Mahamandal hermitage he stayed in as a young man in Benares. I was pleased, he wrote, that my new home possessed an attic where I managed to spend the dawn and morning hours. The ashram members, knowing little of meditation practices, thought I should employ my whole time in organizational duties. They gave me praise for my afternoon work in their office. Don't try to catch God so soon, this ridicule accompanied one of my early departures toward the attic. Later, doing meditation, I felt lifted as though bodily to a sphere uncircumcised. Thy master cometh today. A divine womanly voice came from everywhere and nowhere. This supernal experience was pierced by a shout from a definite locale. A young priest nicknamed Habu was calling me from the downstairs kitchen. Makunda, enough of meditation. You are needed to run an errand. The Divine Mother's words were not spoken for the benefit of that priest, but for Makunda, the wise virgin. For this is the day his guru, Sri Yukteswar, came to him. Grieve not, friends, if you feel that you have been foolish. No error is forever. Someday, if you keep your lamp lit now, your opportunity will come. In the Bhagavad Gita, the 6th chapter, Krishna promises every devotee, Arjuna, none who work for self-redemption will ever meet an evil destiny. Spiritual failure, though a deep disappointment, is always temporary. Eternal hellfire is but a projection of the vindictiveness in the human mind. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
Qualities or conversations to match together. And yet, if you start to dive deeper into them, it becomes transparent why he put these together. It wasn't just coincidental. When I first came to Ananda village, I was all gung-ho, as many young devotees are, and I was just certain that I knew why everybody was there and we were all doing the same thing. And it wasn't for years that I realized, a friend actually told me, he basically gave me a comeuppance. And he said, you know, people are at Ananda for many different reasons, not just for deep meditation. Sometimes they're there because it's a safe place. Sometimes they're there to raise their children. Sometimes they're there to reach a little bit. You know, sometimes it's there because they like community. There's a lot of different reasons, and Ananda is a vehicle to serve the upliftment of mankind, which is why Yogananda came into this world at all levels. But deeper than that, of course, is the service to those who would become spiritually free, those who would live in the presence of God and become channels for the presence of God into the lives of others. And so anyway, in my enthusiasm, I was working with a man who had been with Ananda in the very earliest days. I moved there in 1985, and Ananda Village was founded in 1967, 68, 69, across those 3 years. And he'd been there in the early days. And I got to talk with him. I said, how long have you been here? What's your story? And he said, oh, well, I was here in the early days, but then I was gone for about 12 years, and I just got back. And I looked at him like he was crazy, and I said, what happened? And well, what is it like being back? And he said, well, basically, what happened to him, there's a cute story. Our friends live in Hawaii, in an area called Puna. And the nickname for the people who live there is Punatics. And it's so easy to live there that you just get into this hypnosis. The world throws food at your feet and everything. It's always sunny. It's always lovely. It's just glorious. And one man said, it's easy to just go there and wake up 20 years later with dreadlocks and 4 kids. And that's essentially what happened to him. He was living a deep spiritual life. He was very hungry for the presence of God. He could feel it awakening in him, and then a young lady came through his world, and he fell in love, and they moved to the Bay Area, and they opened a restaurant, and he had a couple of kids, and the next thing you know, 12 years had gone by, and he woke up one morning and said, what am I doing? What am I doing? The marriage wasn't particularly happy. The kids weren't particularly happy. There wasn't any kind of noble dharma in the life he was living. And they talked about it, and he realized that the thing that he should do was return, because his soul was so hungry for the presence of God, and he'd just forgotten. And I said, well, what is it like being back? And he said, it's very interesting. He said, I found that it does not matter what you did yesterday. And this is not by way of saying it doesn't matter what you go and do, because those 12 years were filled with an enormous amount of human suffering and anguish and sadness and loss and all the things that happen when we play it out in the world. But he said, it doesn't matter what I did yesterday. And really, it doesn't matter what I'm going to do tomorrow. All that matters is what I'm doing right now. Immortality, we tend to think of immortality as something external. And everybody wants to live forever, but most people don't know what to do with an extra 15 minutes of free time. There's a part of us that's committed to living eternally, immortally, because we know at a spiritual level, our deepest soul recognizes that we are immortal. We know it intuitively. But to play it out on the surface, can you imagine immortality, really? Can you imagine immortality? The body just getting older and older and older, and you never are able to get out of it? That's a very real script, because nobody ever said immortality had anything to do with perpetual youth. But even if it did, think about what a hell it would be. I mean, it'd be like being in kindergarten for eternity. And while I talk about kindergarten sometimes, people go, oh yes, nappy time sounds really good to me. If it was imposed every day for the rest of eternity, you would get tired of it very, very quickly. And we joke about it. Woody Allen said, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality by not dying. When we really start to consider how God has created this dream and is manifesting through us, not has manifested us, is manifesting through each one of us right here, right now. We start to realize that the story is somewhat different than what we think. I want to talk, everyone in here has been on the path for some period of time. If we are new to the path, one of the first things we can do to build energy is to associate ourselves with good behaviors. To start to look for things that are uplifting in an outward way and start to ally ourselves with those things. But the world is designed so that every good thing, every good outward thing is balanced by an equal measure, always and forever, in equal measure, by something equally unpleasant, equally dark, equally hard. Because that's how creation was made. And so the message to those who've been seeking for any length of time isn't to just reach for something nice. There's a movie out about the life of C.S. Lewis. I can't remember the name of it anymore. But he's very stoic. He's an Oxford professor. He's very much in his spine. He's a great writer and a great spiritual writer. He wrote the Narnia Chronicles, the Screw Tape Letters, and some of the other things. Very inspiring. But he was very self-contained, and he was not going to go outside of this deep inner connection. And sure enough, a young lady shows up in his life, and they become enamored of each other, and then she is diagnosed shortly thereafter with cancer. And it's terminal, and they know it. And she looks at him, and they're deciding, do we continue our friendship? Do we continue the connection? And she looks at him, and she says, the joy is now for the sorrow later. The joy is now for the sorrow later. That's the deal. And then they decide to go ahead and play it out, because the play of God is it's not to just become sterile and neutral and nothing happen, but if we live in the center, we start to discover that in the midst of all the things that are off-center, that are joyful and happy and out here, and all the things that are oh so sad and depressing, there's always a stream of joy running right through the center of it. And the call to immortality, the call of the spiritual life, is to live in that joy. Is to live in that joy, no matter what. And then, if you have a guru, if you're sincere on the path, you'll get a guru. And if you have a guru, the guru's job is to do what? The guru's job is to take you into all the places where you do not yet experience that joy. And then to leave you there. The leaving you there is a little bit like the Native American story of how young Indian, I don't remember the tribe, but how young Indian braves became men. And what they would do is, and it was a sacred tradition in this tribe to never ever speak of this. So generation after generation, it was still a moving experience. The young men, when they hit a certain age, would be taken out in the woods, way deep in the woods, and blindfolded, and placed on a stump or in a particular place, and left blindfolded all night long. And they couldn't leave the stump. They couldn't fall asleep. They had to stay awake, and they had to stay blindfolded. No matter what came, they couldn't leave that area. And, you know, the night noises, the night animals, fatigue, all the things that come in the course of that kind of experience. And in the morning, when the sun came up, they were allowed to remove the mask. And what they always found was their uncle, their grandfather, their father sitting just across the meadow watching. Just across the meadow, making sure that they were safe and protected as they went through this ordeal. It's the same thing for us. The guru sits across the meadow, but he takes us into these circumstances because as long as we condition our joy, as long as we condition our love, as long as we condition ourselves, we're trapped. We're trapped in this dream, and we're trapped to go through the up and down cycles, the constant great aspirations. Oh, this is a great thing. It's all going to change the world. Everything's going to be wonderful. Oh, my God, there it goes down the pit. And oh, we'll do it again. And just riding wave after wave. Oh, my gosh. And the things that are in the human heart that are so compelling, the yearning for security, for friendship, for love, for wealth, for power, for understanding, all these things, they never last. They never last. And that's good news if we take off the blindfold, if we look across and see the Master sitting there, helping us to feel that inner power, that inner joy, that inner wholeness that's always been there. It's always there. We went to pilgrimage is great. I'm not a fan of promoting travel for escapism. But pilgrimage is a way of breaking the habits of the daily life so that we have a chance to experience something beyond that, something deeper. And we go to holy places where people have lived in the presence of God and have emanated the qualities and presence of God into the world. So we've put down the distractions of our mind, and we're open, we're supporting each other in the God remembrance, and then we're in environments that help us be fed by that God remembrance. We went to the Holy Land a couple of years ago now. And while we were there, we went to where Christ was crucified. Now, there are several different versions of where Christ was crucified. We went to one of them, and I don't know if it's the place or not. But I know that I had an experience that it was completely unexpected. I had no way of anticipating and no place to put it, no hook to hang it on. Swami Kriyananda spoke to the fact that when Christ was crucified, the sorrowing, the lamentation was not for himself. It was for mankind. And that he was so beyond the human experience that he didn't feel the physical pain that was clearly happening in his physical body. That was not where his consciousness was. And there was a place where you can go where the cross supposedly was, and the blood would have fallen on the stone below, and it's covered up, it's all shrouded, except there's a place you can reach through and touch the rock. And I reached through. We were there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and just in this deep state. And I reached in and I touched the rock, and I entered into a state. You should never talk about your spiritual experiences, by the way, frivolously. I'm only doing this because I really feel like Master wants this shared. But I felt an expansion of consciousness that went so deep into stillness and spread so far that it embraced the entire universe. I could just feel. I didn't ride that wave. I didn't go deep enough into that wave to have the experience of Christ consciousness or cosmic consciousness, but I could feel it. I could feel how indifferent he could be to the human experience, his own personal relationship to the human experience in that moment, in that period, because all he could feel was the love of God, was the joy of spirit, and the deep, abiding peace that lies underneath every single experience, every single reality. And all he could feel was the sadness and the pain for the people who were so out of tune with that they were doing these things that were going to cause them pain. See, the pain we suffer is not a real thing. The pain we suffer is where our attention is. And the pain we suffer is an accurate measure of our distance from God. Think about that. We are never away from the love of God. We're never away from the joy of God, except that we turn our attention away. We keep our eyes of awareness, our concentration closed. And we tune into these little tiny stories, and we make them so immediate and so compelling that it justifies us feeling sad, because we can't feel God's love. We can't feel the joy. The saint said once, he said, the cause of suffering is never real. The cause of suffering is never real. But the suffering itself is real. And when you suffer, God suffers inside of you. And all it is turning the mind, turning the attention away from the presence of God. So how do we turn it back? Come to Sunday service. Come to purification. Be around others who are reaching deeply into the presence of Spirit. Meditate regularly, the best you can. There's a story, we don't have time to tell it in full, but there's a great story about one of God's missionaries, one of God's messengers coming down to earth. God sent him down and said, find my greatest devotee. And he finds this tapasic, this man who's doing tapasya for decades on end. And this messenger is very impressed with that. And then he runs across this guy who's drunk, who's trying to get a post into a hole. And he says, what are you doing? He says, me and God, we're trying to get this post into this hole. And we're not doing so good. And says, what's your name? He says, George. Anyway, he goes back up and he says, I met your greatest devotee. He's been doing tapasya forever and ever and ever. And God says, I don't think I know him. Did you meet anybody else? Oh, yeah, I met George. He says, George? Oh, how's George? How is he doing? Well, he's not doing so good. He's pretty drunk and he can't get oh, well, you tell George. You tell them both. I'll be down as soon as I can get, finish passing a camel through the eye of a needle. And he goes down to the Tapasvik. And the guy's been doing the tapasya. He says, passing a camel through the eye of a needle? It can't be done. Oh, bah, I've been wasting all my time. He throws it all down and goes off and lives a worldly life. But George, he hears that and he starts dancing in ecstasy. He says, oh, God who can create this entire universe, who can create everything, he can do that in a moment. He'll be here with me in just a moment. It's not how perfectly you do the practices. The practices help. They are the disciplines that bring God's grace. But you can do practices forever, even deeply, and nothing happens. If your heart is egoically involved, is committed to how you want it. But when you live your life open and pulling on the presence of God, Master says God cannot but respond to a true heart call. And then it doesn't matter, for crying out loud. It doesn't matter what your body's doing. It doesn't matter what your mind is doing. It doesn't matter what your behaviors are even doing. You know, if you're loving God. What is a spiritual job? You would think that a spiritual job would be, oh gosh, being light bearers up here and doing this, doing that. You know, I spent decades before I came up here doing building. And I'll tell you, it was at least as spiritual as anything I do at this point. There is so much power in just because I did it for God. I remembered God in the midst of it. Which isn't to say that we shouldn't share the highest that we know. And yes, this is a great blessing to serve in this role also. But I still find myself going and doing dishes. I still find myself going and building things. I still find myself finding other ways to express the consciousness of God through me. And I find them to be just as immediate and just as important, and often more so than standing up here having a talk. Whatever God would do through you, whatever, if you give it to God, if you do it with God, if you put that post in that hole with God, it really matters less how drunk you are. Because God can cure that. God's love takes care of everything. Swami Kriyananda, he loved good food, and he went to Yogananda and he said, sir, I'm very concerned. I have this desire. I have this love of good food. And Master said, don't fret. Don't sweat the little things. When ecstasy comes, everything goes. One of the best ways to keep our mind there is just mentally, whatever your karma compels you to do. If you can do meditation, Yogananda said, when you get swept by your karma, you suffer. So it's much better if you can get past your karma, stay in tune, stay connected to the ashram, stay connected with those who are living in the light and reaching for the light together. Because every day you spend in delusion is a day you suffer. And it's your suffering. He said to some devotees, he said, many of you will leave. Many of you will leave, but it need not be so if you would stay in tune. Staying in tune, chant, meditate, be around other truth seekers, read the saints, do affirmations. And then he said, repeat this poem every day. And we won't do the whole thing because it's fairly long, but it's the poem Samadhi. Vanished the veils of light and shade, lifted every vapor of sorrow, sailed away all dawns of fleeting joy, gone the dim sensory mirage. Love, hate, health, disease, life, death, perished these false shadows on the screen of duality. Waves of laughter, scylla's of sarcasm, melancholic whirlpools melting in a vast sea of bliss. The storm of Maya stilled by magic wand of intuition deep. The universe, forgotten dream subconsciously lurks, ready to invade my newly wakened memory divine. I live without the cosmic shadow, but it is not bereft of me. As the sea exists without the waves, but they breathe not without the sea. Dreams, wakings, states of deep turiya, sleep, present, past, future, no more for me, but ever present, all flowing I everywhere. It goes on beautifully. He says, Thou art I am thou, knower, knowing, known as one, tranquil, unbroken thrill, eternally living, ever new peace, enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy, samadhi bliss. Beyond the limits of the mortal frame, to farthest boundary of eternity, where I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me, colossal container I of all things made. By deeper, longer, thirsty, Guru-given meditation comes the celestial samadhi, and it resolves itself, and let's take this inside. Myself and everything enters the great myself, gone forever, fitful, flickering shadows of mortal memory, spotless is my mental sky, below, ahead, and high above. Eternity and I, one united ray. A tiny bubble of laughter, I am become the sea of mirth itself.